Hey everyone, it's Erin here. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about borderline personality disorder, which is something that I have been diagnosed with. And so I feel like it's important for me to share about what it's like, because it, along with pretty much all the personality disorders, have a lot of stigma because they're not talked about as much as depression and anxiety and eating disorders. So I have some notes here, so don't mind me looking at those. So first of all, what is a personality disorder? So I used my abnormal psychology textbook to get this information. So it defines personality disorders as a group of disorders involving long-standing, inflexible, and maladaptive personality traits that impair social and occupational functioning. So really it's something a little bit more serious that impairs someone's functioning in various parts of their life. There are 10 personality disorders in the DSM-5 that are split into 3 clusters, cluster A, B, and C. Borderline personality disorder falls into cluster B. Personality disorders are actually more common than you might think. 1 in 10 people meet the diagnostic criteria for a personality disorder, which is very high considering how little they are talked about and how little people know about personality disorders. One thing is that they are more common in people that have other psychological disorders such as depression and anxiety, so the comorbidity rate is pretty high with personality disorders. I want to say it was, if you have depression or anxiety, you're 7 times more likely to have a personality disorder, or no, I think it's the other way around. If you have a personality disorder, you're 7 times as likely to have depression or anxiety. So for borderline personality disorder specifically, its prevalence in the general community is about 3%, but in treatment settings it's at about 9%. Because it, like all personality disorders, is highly represented in treatment settings. So a lot of people who get treatment have personality disorders. The definition the book provides for borderline personality disorder is a personality disorder defined by impulsiveness and unpredictability, an uncertain self-image, intense and unstable social relationships, and extreme swings of mood. I'll go into later what the DSM-5 criteria for borderline personality disorder is, but I think that's a pretty good definition for it. I certainly experience mood swings. I have a lot of trouble with interpersonal relationships. I'll think that everything's great and that someone's my friend, and then I'll get paranoid and think that they hate me. Self-image, I really don't have a stable self-image. Depending on the day of the week, it changes what I think I'm going to do in the future, if I'm going to have a future. So I don't have a stable goal to really work towards. I've kind of put in place the goal of psychology, but I'm not always behind that goal. Borderline personality disorder is really hard to treat, and it's a very dangerous personality disorder because one of the things is there's a lot of suicidal actions with people with borderline personality disorder. There was a 20-year follow-up study done, and approximately 7.5% of the borderline personality disorder patients had died from suicide in those 20 years. So that's a high suicide rate, and you've got to think that even more had attempted suicide multiple times, which is common with borderline personality disorder. So now the DSM-5 criteria for it. To be diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, you need to meet at least 5 or more of the following criteria: frantic efforts to avoid abandonment, unstable interpersonal relationships in which others are either idealized or devalued, an unstable sense of self, self-damaging impulsive behaviors in at least 2 areas such as spending, sex, substance abuse, reckless driving, and binge eating. Recurrent suicidal behavior, gestures, or self-interest behavior, e.g. cutting self. Marked mood reactivity. Chronic feelings of emptiness. Recurrent bouts of intense or poorly controlled anger. And during stress, a tendency to experience transient paranoid thoughts and dissociative symptoms. So that's a lot. And I'm going to go into them a little bit more. So frantic efforts to avoid abandonment. Ever since I was little, I've been afraid that everyone's going to leave me, which leads to me either clinging onto them really tightly, which tends to push them away, or pushing them away myself before they can push me away. And so I haven't had many long-term friendships, and even those that I have had, they go through periods where I don't talk to them, because I feel like they don't like me anymore. Which leads into the unstable interpersonal relationships in which others are either idealized or devalued. When I make a new friend, I'm like, oh my god, this is the best person ever. I love this person, we're going to be best friends forever. How have I not met this person until now? And then it could be a month later and I'm like, I hate this person. I hate everything they do. So, I don't have a stable sense of how I feel towards other people. Like, they can do one thing and that will change my complete picture of them, even if it's a small thing. So it's really hard for me to have a stable idea of who another person is. And one of the things with borderline personality disorder is there's a lot of black and white thinking. So I either think of them as a good person or a bad person. There's no in between. I either love them or I hate them. So it's really hard, as you can imagine, to make friends when that's your thinking pattern. Unstable sense of self, I touched on this, where I have really no idea what I'm going to do in the future, and it changes every day. And I have a really unstable picture of what I'm good at and what my skills are. I one day may like something about myself, and the next day I think I'm terrible at that thing. So it's hard to be loving and caring towards myself when I always identify my skills and things like that. Self-damaging impulsive behaviors in at least 2 areas, such as spending, sex, substance abuse, reckless driving, and binge eating. So borderline personality disorder has a really common comorbidity with substance abuse. Also with the self-interest behavior and suicidality that comes in later. That's more impulsivity. One of the things that they have found is the prefrontal cortex isn't as engaged in people with borderline personality disorder. So that kind of leads to the impulsivity a bit. Then recurrent suicidal behavior, gestures, or self-interest behavior. I began cutting myself when I was 15. I've also self-harmed by scratching myself, punching myself. I've come up with plans for killing myself. It's a really serious issue with borderline personality disorder. Marked mood reactivity. So that's the mood swings they were talking about earlier. mood swings. So that's the mood swings they were talking about earlier. One of the things the book mentioned is that people with borderline personality disorder are hypersensitive to other people's emotions, and we kind of perceive things that aren't there all the time. And so something really small can just set us off. And so one minute we can be happy, and the next we can be really sad. Chronic feelings of emptiness, I think that's a little self-explanatory. We just feel empty, no purpose. And I mean, if you don't have a stable sense of who you are and what you're going to do in your future, you can't really see a purpose, and that leads to feeling empty. At least that's how it is in my experience. Recurrent bouts of intense or poorly controlled anger. So along with the mood swings, we get really angry really easily and not always control it. I tend to not show anger, but I do get really angry for no reason sometimes. Or like the littlest thing will set me off and I'll be like fuming inside my head. And then during stress, a tendency to experience transient paranoid thoughts and dissociative symptoms. So when I have panic attacks, I'll dissociate, which is kind of scary, but yeah. And then the book has this quote that I want to read to you. It kind of is romanticizing borderline personality disorder, I think, but it still, I think, is a good quote for kind of giving you an idea of what it's like. So it's by Jonathan Kellerman, who's a clinical psychologist and successful mystery writer. And it says, they're the chronically depressed, the terminally addictive, the compulsively divorced, living from one emotional disaster to the next. Bed hoppers, stomach pumpers, freeway jumpers, and sad-eyed bench sitters with arms stitched up like footballs and psychic wounds that can never be sutured. Their egos are as fragile as spun sugar. Their psyches irretrievably fragmented like a jigsaw puzzle with crucial pieces missing. They play roles with a larceny, excel at being anyone but themselves, crave intimacy but repel it when they find it. Some of them gravitate towards stage or screen, others do their acting in more subtle ways. Borderlines go from therapist to therapist, hoping to find a magic bullet for their crushing feelings of emptiness. They turn to chemical bullets, gobble tranquilizers and antidepressants, alcohol, and cocaine. So I think that kind of gives an idea with what it's like to have borderline personality disorder. It's definitely not a pleasant experience. I never really know what's coming next. I'm really reliant on my medications and therapy, and like even with therapy it's hard because it's hard to make the connection with the therapist, which is necessary for therapy to work. And that's actually why I'm not in therapy now, is because the therapist I was seeing, I just didn't connect with, and I didn't feel like I could open up to him. And so I stopped seeing him, and I'm going to look into someone by my school so that I have someone to see in the fall. But that'll mean I won't be seeing anyone for the rest of the summer. But yeah, I think that's a pretty good general summary of what borderline personality disorder is. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. I'll try to answer them as best I can. I'm not a professional, so I don't have all the answers. Thanks for watching. I'll hopefully have another video posted soon. Please like and subscribe. Let me know what types of videos you want to see. Any suggestions you have for me, I'm open to hearing. And I hope you're all doing well in your recovery. Bye!